So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll just wait one more minute to allow us to start at 12 as other participants and the audience join us. I'll start by introducing the panel and then we will move into the webinar itself. So just bear with us one moment. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everybody to our third series of webinars from the Impact Research Group here at UEA. Today we are looking at working and measuring what matters most to people that we work with through a process of co-production. So today we have a really powerful panel to share their experiences of a variety of projects that we're working on together. So my name is Sally Hardy. I work here at UEA as part of the Impact Research Group. My colleague Caitlin Notley will be talking to you about the work of the Citizens Academy. Maurina Barron, Paulette Lewis and Gabby Irwin will be sharing experiences of working on a global health workforce initiative and how we've been working together to strengthen partnerships on a global scale. And then colleagues from the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, Bonnie, Teague and Bryony G, will be talking about how we work together with children and young people in a process of co-production when really understanding what matters to the people that we work with, whether it's through research or any other service improvement and transformational process of work. So the webinar today will start with some key principles of working in a co-production approach. So this is work that I have developed over the years with colleagues in Australia and in England, Scotland and Wales and European countries, looking at how do you engage with the principles of collaboration, inclusion and participation through some key principles of co-production. Then, as I said, we will move to hear from Caitlin around the work of the Citizens Academy and how to achieve inclusive participatory engagement with our patients, the public and service user engagement. And then we will look at working on a global scale through partnership working and the principles of mutual benefit. And then how to work and engage with children and young people will be explored by our colleagues Bonnie and Bryony. And then we will try to ensure we've got time at the end for a panel discussion where we all come back on screen. And that is where you as our participants can pose questions. So my other two colleagues that are with me today are Professor Kim Manley and Professor Jonathan Webster, who will be keeping an eye on the chat and will be helping to close the webinar and share with you what's next. So as we're going along, if you can think about what you would like to know more or whether you've just got a point of clarification, do drop that in the chat function and we will try and pick that up at the end. So next slide, please, Em. So first of all, let's think about what matters when researching and working together as collaborating partners. So what I've got here is an image of a wall in Jerusalem and someone has graffitied on it, the separation wall will fall. And in history, we have seen how segregation, separation just hasn't been a sustainable model, and that the diversity and the strengths of community and social change happens when you bring people together to share their uniqueness and their contribution to community health, well-being and sustainable models of engagement. Next slide, please. So before we start, just to bring some theoretical content to understanding working in a co-production approach. the work that I engage in and have engaged in over a long period of time has drawn heavily from Carr and Kemmis's work and other action researchers, with a particular focus on participatory active action research. And as you can see here on the diagram in the slide, there are increasing circles or cycles of activity where you are constantly reviewing and being informed by the dialogue and the level of engagement that you're working with participants on any initiative, whether it's a project, whether it's an educational program, whether it's a service improvement initiative, etc. But what's missing from here is the word evaluation. Although it says reflect, observe, act, they are in themselves processes of evaluation. But on the other side of this slide, you will see the ladder of participation that has been devised way back in the 60s, early 70s, and is a model that I use when I am evaluating the effect and the impact that I'm having or I am offering when working with broad stakeholder engagement. And it's a model where you can really just check again and remain highly critical of where am I and how am I engaging with people? Am I just thinking about educating and informing, or am I truly working towards a delegation of power and allowing those that I'm working with as true citizens to really drive the agendas and the activities that we're undertaking together? So have a think about that as you're listening to the webinar today about where are we? And certainly we're not saying we've got it right, but I'm hoping that these are examples where you can see the principles and philosophy of that ladder of participation revealing itself in the work that we're doing together. Next slide, please. So these are some 12 principles that have come out of work that I've been engaging with for many years now. And one of the core principles when starting any process of co-production and participatory engagement is to have a clear vision and understanding for reaching out and ensuring that stakeholder engagement is involved at a very early point. So having a clear vision about not only why you want to engage people as participants, but who are the people that have a stake or an interest in the project, and how do you engage them in a way that's meaningful for them, which then moves into the second principle, which is about identifying the purpose of engaging with different stakeholder groups, because often when you're undertaking research, you ask the why bother question. Why are you engaging people? What is the purpose? What is the expectation of their engagement? Having that clear at the outset is important. The third principle is around a co-production approach in that level of engagement, that it is a process of joining together different people's expectations, anticipations, hopes, fears of engaging in a process of work with you. That then requires a broad range of strategies for that level of engagement, whether you're snowball sampling, whether you're targeting specific groups, or whether you're working as a broad sweep to try and get as many people to engage with you as possible. So it's important to think about those strategies of engagement. It's also important to recognise the need to remain flexible. So going back to those circles and cycles of influence through the participatory action research model is being willing to be flexible and to change your approach as you learn more about the people that you're working with and for. And then to go back to clarifying the expectations, the contribution, the purpose, the vision, and also co-creating what people want out of this engagement. What are the potential outcomes that this project can bring? Next slide, please. Then it's also about considering where and how you meet with people. Some people still find it incredibly intimidating to even walk onto our university campus. And again, Caitlin will share with you about how we engage and work with the Citizens Academy to bring people into our space, but also the need for us to reach out and be where people are, to be in their space and working in place. Communication is significantly important, and this is again where language power differentials and that ladder of participation can be seen in the words and the language that we use, the pace at which we speak to people, and the variety of different methods of communicating with people. And also important to think about how to manage conflict, because sometimes people tell us things that perhaps we don't want to hear, or it's uncomfortable to listen to their stories. But it's important to have a mechanism to allow that dialogue to be had. Avoiding the use of jargon, making sure that our language is inclusive, and to avoid using those shorthand acronyms that we love in healthcare and education. Timing is important, giving the appropriate amount of time, accommodating and adapting to the time people need to fully understand their role in the project and the activity and the engagement expectations. And also thinking about being creative in how we engage and using left and right sides of the brain to really use unique mechanisms and processes that I think you'll see in the projects that we've got today, how creativity cuts across social separation and that potential wall of separation. And then another key learning I've had is it's important to give as much time to ending relationships in projects as you have taken to engage and install those mechanisms for active participation and collaboration. And one of the wonderful things that we can do together when we have worked together in meaningful relationship is to celebrate the achievements, and not just to leave that to the end of a project, but to celebrate achievements along the way. Next slide, please. So if you listen out to some of those principles in the examples that we share with you today, the first of which I would like to introduce my colleague Caitlin Notley here at UEA to talk through the work of the Citizens Academy that has recently been launched and established for stakeholder engagement, as I said, public and patient and service user engagement. Caitlin, over to you.
Thank you, Sally, for that kind introduction. I think this talk just follows really nicely from the principles of co-production that you've clearly outlined for us, Sally. This is an example of one way in which here at the University of East Anglia we are trying to put those principles into practice through the development of our Citizens Academy. Next slide, please. So you might be asking, what is a Citizens Academy and who are the citizens? Well, the Citizens Academy really is about us all as a community of like-minded people. So that includes members of staff, academics, educators here at the university and the community that we serve. So members of the public, patients with experience of particular clinical conditions and their carers. So the citizens are all of us. The Citizens Academy was really established as a result of a task and finish group that had wide consultation across the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences and reported back in 2019. So at that time, the consultation recognised that there were real strengths in terms of patient and public involvement across both research and teaching in our schools of medicine and of health sciences. Some pockets of excellent practice and really amazing shining examples of how to do service user involvement, engagement, co-production in research really well, but also perhaps some areas where improvements were needed, and just really the need for a consistent approach, bringing together everything we do across the faculty in terms of patient and public engagement. So I was appointed to lead the Citizens Academy back in August last year. And we've spent a number of months setting up the Academy through the excellent engagement of a steering group involving, of course, members of the public and patients we've worked with over the years, and a number of working groups focused on specific areas where we need to improve what we're doing around patient and public involvement and engagement. Next slide, thank you. So at the heart of our Faculty of Medicine and Health Citizens Academy, our mission statement is that we have a shared purpose to ultimately improve health education and research by involving and engaging members of the public and patients in everything we do. So there's a real recognition that this is a reciprocal relationship where everyone is to benefit. As academics and educators, we benefit from working with the public and the patients whose our research will eventually benefit. And as members of the public and patients, we hope that there will be reciprocal benefit in terms of defining the research agenda, being involved in telling us what matters most to people, what we should be focusing on, in helping us to improve the way that we educate our future nurses and doctors by really understanding the patient perspective. So what we do in our Citizens Academy, as I said, it's really a coordinated attempt to bring together everything around patient and public involvement. We're a central point of contact where employees of the university or members of the public seeking to become involved in the work of the university can get in touch, can find out what sort of involvement opportunities are available, can listen to case studies of work that have already been done and understand different types of involvement. We can signpost to existing service user and co-production panels across the region. So the Citizens Academy is not a whole new patient involvement panel, but it's really bringing together those pockets of excellence that already exist and allowing us to link people together. So, for example, we have an excellent patient and public involvement panel working in primary care research. So anyone coming to us with a research project, particularly based in primary care, we would be able to signpost them to that existing panel with a wealth of experience to share. Really importantly, we have a service user database. This has been developed over many years and is shared across the schools of medicine and health sciences. We have around 80 people registered at the moment with different types of clinical experience, directly themselves or as carers and service users of health and social care. And these are people who are volunteering and want to help, have been involved in research or teaching before and want to stay involved. And it's continual work of the Citizens Academy is to maintain and update that database, to invite new people to become involved in our work, and to make sure, of course, that those people who've been involved for many years want to continue to be involved in that database. So that's a really valuable resource that we can draw upon when we perhaps have a new research idea, or we want to generate research ideas, or we have an approach to teaching where it's really important that we work with perhaps particular service users with clinical experiences. So the Citizens Academy is really about facilitating those reciprocal relationships between PPI members and members of the UEA faculty staff. A colleague, it's really a kind of dating agency for academics and members of the public. So perhaps a bit more than that, but in a way it is about facilitating those relationships, bringing people together so that they may both benefit from the involvement in research or teaching, whatever that particular involvement activity might be. Importantly, we will be developing our own training modules as well. At the moment, we can signpost to some excellent training that already exists across the region. So this is both for members of the faculty wanting to understand best practice around service user involvement in research or teaching, but also for members of the public or patients who want to become involved and perhaps need some training and support around how to do that. Things like, you know, what to expect when you're attending a research trial steering group meeting, for example. Some really excellent resources already exist, and we will be developing our own based on need. The Citizens Academy, importantly, offers support and mentorship, again, both to all parties involved in the reciprocal relationship of public involvement. Really important, I think, for new members of the public wanting to get involved in research or teaching. We will aim to link them up with a much more experienced service user who will be able to share their experiences and offer support, hints and tips, and also, really importantly, close that loop and offer feedback after a teaching or research event has been engaged with, so that people feel that they have made a valuable contribution and are able to have some kind of supervision and discussion around that after the event. So we have a really proactive steering group. I'm really proud of the work we've achieved so far, who've been fantastic in helping to set up the Citizens Academy, and particularly working groups responding to need. So, for example, the working group really active at the moment and particularly focused on inclusivity and diversity and how we increase the diversity of those who are registered on our service user database. Next slide, thanks. So this is just to give you a quick screenshot of our website. Please do have a look. You can read through there on the website the values that underpin us and the work we do in the Citizens Academy, some case studies of involvement so you can get a bit of an idea of the types of research and teaching that has happened in the past. Also, involvement opportunities. There are a few research studies advertised on there at the moment, and we hope to grow that as people become more aware of the Citizens Academy. So, of course, anyone attending the webinar today who has a research or a teaching involvement opportunity, do let us know and we can make sure we publicise it on the website so that people looking to become involved in our work might just look there and see whether that's something they might be interested in. Also, lots of links to resources around patient and public involvement, some of the more formal teaching and research links, for example, giving an overview of how we are assessed as a faculty in our patient involvement in teaching, links to the research funders and their policies on patient and public involvement, but also some really accessible, helpful how-to guides, which were brilliant sort of starting place for someone perhaps who has never been involved in research or teaching before. Next slide. Some key challenges for our Citizens Academy. These are going to be continual challenges. We will probably always be striving to do better. One particular challenge that's really high on the agenda at the moment has been highlighted by the National Institute for Health Research, who are one of the key research funders funding the research we do in the schools of medicine and health sciences. And they really, through a process of strategic engagement, focused on the fact that through the patient and public involvement work that happens at the moment, we don't effectively reflect the population that we serve. So many of the volunteers that become involved in our work are perhaps, retired people with time to spare, wanting and able to give something back. It is much more challenging to effectively engage with disenfranchised communities, perhaps diverse communities whose voices are not often heard. I think one way that we really are focusing to these kinds of populations is thinking about co-production in the broadest sense, and taking a place-based approach. So in reaching out to the community rather than expecting people to come to us is incredibly important. Working with community leaders and understanding how best to work with different types of communities. So it's an ongoing piece of work and something that we continually strive to improve on. Next slide. So the Citizens Academy was officially launched just earlier this month. We're really proud of this event. It was our attempt to really reach out to the community. On the 3rd of May, we held a public event at the Forum in Norwich. So it was very important to us that this was going to be a face-to-face event based in the community, not at the university. Again, trying to break down those that wall perhaps that has historically existed between the university and the public that it serves. Next slide, thank you. So the event was very well attended. Just a few snapshots of the day here. We were really proud that I think that we hit our sort of inclusivity and diversity aims. We welcome people with all sorts of different disabilities, both hidden and physical disabilities. We tried to make the event as accessible as possible, and we had a British Sign Language interpreter for the panel discussion. The event was completely unticketed and open to the public, and we were very excited that approximately 4,000 people passed through the forum that day. Obviously not all engaging directly with the event, but we really hope that having the event in the heart of the community in this way really showcased what we do at the Citizens Academy around patient and public involvement, and perhaps just generated a spark of interest in someone's mind who hadn't really thought about getting involved in the work of the university before. So we had 16 different stalls exhibiting the work across the faculty. These were based in the local trusts, the research networks, and also particular research groups. And as a result, we had 21 individual responses to our kind of roving questionnaire, students collecting data on iPads from people. And these were expressions of interest from members of the public to get involved in our work. So we were really pleased with that and thought it was a fantastic opportunity for us to have met new members of the public. We also had a really fantastic panel discussion where service users who've worked with us over a number of years were talked about their experience of involvement across research and teaching. And this was hosted by Christy Watson, who's a fantastic speaker, a nurse by background, and gave us a really powerful talk about the importance of taking the patient perspective in all the work we do. So I think that's probably enough for me. I'll just end on the final slide, which is our contact details. Just so you know, please do get in touch with any questions. We'd really love to hear your feedback. Citizens Academy is, work in progress and in development, and we are always open to new ideas and wanting to share experiences. Thanks very much. I'll hand back to you, Sally.
Thank you, Caitlin. Amazing. Next slide, please, Emily. So I'd now like to introduce you to colleagues that I am working with on this Global Health Workforce Initiative, Paulette Lewis, Maurina Barron and Gabby Irwin. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Next slide, please. So hello, everybody. My name's Gabby Irwin. I'm working with NHS England and Improvement, but very much in close collaboration with Paulette and with Maurina and with Sally at the university. This particular programme that we are talking about today, as you will be aware, is part of a global workforce programme. And when you think about co-production in its truest sense, the global workforce element of that title is quite an interesting one to get your head around, really, because where do you start with something that is global when you're talking about all of the different stakeholders that we need to engage with? But the background to this particular programme was really handed to us on a plate in terms of the World Health Organization's global strategy on human resources for health, the workforce up to 2030, where in it there's a real principle of acting local but thinking global. And I think in the UK, that is what we in the workforce, particularly those of us who are involved in international recruitment, are really mindful of, that actually this isn't for us doing international recruitment into the UK. This is not where the ball stops. This is not the end of the road, that actually we need to turn around and face in the other direction and look to where our workforce is coming from, and also to acknowledge that we have a responsibility and we have an ethical need to support the global workforce in its truest sense. So it's a really exciting programme. As I say, when you think global, it's quite a large concept, but actually you have to start somewhere. And this programme was just a perfect example of where we could start. So the initial scoping, the initial idea was there. We were aware that we had international recruitment of nurses and midwives from the Caribbean, and we were keen to, as I say, turn around and face back towards the Caribbean. And with that came the contacts that we have in the existing world of international recruitment. So Paulette and Maurina were very involved in the Caribbean Nursing and Midwifery Association and joined forces with Sally. And the four of us came together and thought, actually, we've got the vision, we've got the background from the World Health Organization. What does that actually mean in terms of co-production, in terms of this program moving forward? So the contacts and the stakeholders were really, really important for us. So understanding firsthand what it means for those in the Caribbean. What are we talking about when we talk about workforce? What are we talking about? What is the culture around the workforce? What are the core principles and values of those who we want to work with? For me, very much around the aspirations, the appetite, and really getting underneath what it is that is important for us to achieve within this programme. Obviously, this was part of, we were aware that we were bringing in international nurses and midwives from the Caribbean. So it was part of our workforce programme within the East of England. But fundamentally, we also really needed to focus on that ethical practice and making sure that what we were doing was ethical. So what does that ethical word mean in workforce, particularly to those who we're working with in the Caribbean? And that was going to be a fundamental principle which underlined the work that we do and the work that we're going to be doing going forward. As I say, starting to work with the stakeholders, we already had a couple of contacts that we could start to see where this ball could start rolling from and where the seed could be sown. So we've started to make those contacts already, which is very, very exciting. And underneath all of this, we really needed to recognise that there was learning to be had across both the UK and countries of the Caribbean for mutual benefit. And I think that, coupled with the ethical, coupled with the need to think about this as a very different workforce programme in terms of sustainability going forward, a long-term commitment that we have, was really very important. Next slide, please. So the aims of this particular project, a collaborative project to promote global healthcare workforce mobilisation between the UK and the Caribbean. So we were aware that in the East of England, this was one of the first projects of its kind. We needed to focus on something very tangible, something very real, something that we knew would be of relevance and of note to those who are working in international recruitment. And at the moment, and at the time with the national team, we knew that midwifery and mental health nursing professionals was an area of particular interest. So our project aims at the moment to undertake a joint scoping exercise that captures and maps variations of expectation between the different professional statutory bodies in our different countries. So very much looking at the educational component, looking at the curriculums that are across both the UK and the Caribbean, really understanding the subtleties, the nuances, but also the core component, the core content of that curriculum. Recognising as well that behind that there are going to be variances, there are going to be differences. And then the second element of it is to use the mapping to inform how to progress a process of mutual student and staff exchange initiatives that can benefit practice and academia in both the UK and the Caribbean. And I would like to underline the second part of that in terms of the Caribbean, because I think the focus has to be very much in that direction. So I'd like to hand over to Paulette for the next slide, please.
I'll just talk to you briefly about the Caribbean Nurses and Midwifery Association. My name is Paulette Lewis, and I'm the president for the Caribbean Nurses Association. I think it's important to understand that this organization was formed in order to come together in a collaborative way to have one voice for our Caribbean nurses. And as mentioned before, the recruitment of Caribbean nurses to this country is something which we needed to look at. So one of our aim was and purpose of this organization, which started about 18 months ago, was to create an environment which will provide support and professional development and collaborative working across the Caribbean and in conjunction with the UK. So our vision is to have one voice for the Caribbean nurses and midwives in driving change towards improvement in health and social care and education, and also to look at workforce and policies and how we can work together for, as we talked about before, mutual benefit for both the Caribbean and that of the UK. So the purpose of our group in terms of what we are hoping to evaluate and get out of it is to develop a unique group of professionals who come to this country to work, but also to ensure that they're looked after, they're established, they are embedded within the service we have. And also one of our key aims is to engage and work with other partners and organizations, because that's the only way we are going to develop and get mutual benefit, both from the Caribbean nurses and nurses within the UK. So we want to be sustainable, and we want to be ensure that we have the right type of nurses that can work within the UK. It's very important from our point of view to look at how we work locally with the Caribbean nurses that we have within the UK, but how can we work with the university and other organizations in developing a pathway, a system of work that will also benefit the UK, but also benefit the Caribbean as a whole. And that's important. So coming together as an organization, the Caribbean Nurses Association, and working with the university and other partners, this will create a system that will help us to work together, to look at curriculum, to look at healthcare, to look at policy, and to help us in the Caribbean to get back some benefits from the mobilization of staff across the Caribbean and into the UK. So I think this is really great in working together because there are benefits on both sides. And we as an organization found it's really beneficial to have worked with the university here and with our colleagues who have spoken before in developing a curriculum and a pathway that will benefit the Caribbean and also benefit us here in the Caribbean. So that's really positive. So as a Caribbean Nurses and Midwives Association, we advocate for greater investment, and also with the diversity of knowledge and skills we bring to the table, that in itself will also help in influencing how we prepare for the future. Because as mentioned before, we're not only looking at what's local and national, we're looking at a global situation. And if we can learn from each other, and if this project is successful in its evaluation, then we can roll this out across to see how can we address the global issue around international recruitment and benefiting the Caribbean, UK, and other countries on the long term. So I'm looking forward to this project, and we're working on this project, and it's really great. So I'll hand over now to Maurina. Oh, sorry. I just, Maurina, you can carry on. I think I've covered.
Okay. I think this collaborative project really demonstrates the key principles that Sally mentioned, the key principles of co-productivity. And this initiative, really, heralds what we're trying to achieve here generally. So in terms of what we've done so far, what we've done is that we've engaged with key stakeholders, including University of East Anglia, NHS, the National Health Service, with representation from Gabi, Health Education England. And what we have managed to do is to secure some prime funding to support the work of the program, and all thanks to Gabby for spearheading that. We have also agreed a program proposal, and that has gone through the ethics committee at the University of East Anglia that Sally has submitted. So far, we have invited candidates to apply to work with the project as part of the program. So we actually selected 3 people, one to work on the midwifery element, one to work on the mental health, and somebody located in the Caribbean, so that we have a good perspective of the different types of curriculum, training, etc. And in terms of objective, we are aiming to establish a series of mutual institutional relationships via a memorandum of understanding, from which we will develop a collaborative partnership of key stakeholders to achieve a sustainable project activity and outcomes at a pace to create mutual institutional benefits of engagement. So basically what we've done, we've linked up with various bodies in the Caribbean, so University of the West Indies. We have somebody from Jamaica, St. Lucia, etc. Quite a few people across to represent the West Indies to work with us. We have also developed we're aiming to co-produce a joint curriculum scoping and review exercise, and the aim here is to map out the UK education with the professional statutory body, as well as with that of the Caribbean nurses and midwives. We are also aiming to evidence the requirement of the workforce skills and expertise. So what we want to do is to look at expertise, the skills and expertise, both here and in the Caribbean, and look to identify the gaps so that we could address elements of training needs. And from there, in terms of strengthening and develop it, to encourage mutual exchange of activities. We're also aiming to meet developmental needs for those transitioning, so those who are coming over here from the Caribbean, to help them adjust to the new culture, not just the national culture, but the workplace culture as well. And that we're aiming to achieve through highly effective supervision, as well as pastoral care, coaching and mentoring. This is something that CNMA as an organization have really worked hard on, and it was actually recognized by the Florence Nightingale Foundation in terms of the pastoral care that we've been given to international recruits. We're also aiming to co-produce a series of outputs so that we for wider dissemination through publication, conferences, events, etc. So once we get that project sorted out, we're looking to disseminate our findings and encourage further participation around that. So that's with the aim of maximizing innovation uptake. So next slide, please. So subsequent steps. So with all of that, we are hoping to move towards internationalization of the curriculum. So we are looking to promote global health competencies. We are looking to offer elective placements overseas, so a mutual exchange of placements, and looking to encourage other placement-based learning activities across the global workforce, in other words. Additional initiatives are being explored in order to embrace potential for double degrees in the form of transnational education. So if the curriculum is going to address both the needs of the Caribbean as well as the UK, so we're looking to see how we can reflect that in terms of the type of output, degree output. And the second part of that is looking at peer-to-peer and place-to-place exchange both for students as well as staff programs. So this is similar to the old Erasmus scheme that we had. This approach is in agreement with the twinned organizations and offers work experience for a period of time within another country and experiences of other institutions. So it opens up the opportunity for both student elective placement and for staff exchange so that we can learn from each other on a domestic level and be able to draw on anecdotes in practice when we are teaching. So hopefully everyone will come out with a richness of experience on both sides. Okay, so next slide, please. And I hand over to next speaker, please.
Thank you, Maurina. So now I want to introduce you to Bonnie Teague and Bryony G, who are going to talk through how to work in a co-production approach with children and young people. Bonnie and Bryony, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you, and welcome everybody, and hello. I'm Bonnie, and my colleague Bryony and I work in a team embedded in the NHS, working to co-develop and co-deliver programmes of research to service users and to community members, focused in the areas of mental health and dementia. So we're already working with people who are quite structurally disempowered before we've even kind of got through the door. So if we could move to the next slide, Emily, please. And it's very difficult when we talk about co-production to split off the power. The two are inherently bound together, power and co-production. And co-production can be transformative when we talk about a power relationship and how we build power between us all. But when we're working with children, young people and their families, what we are doing is working within a very complex and dynamic field. So normally when we talk about addressing power imbalances within a relationship from a researcher perspective, we're talking usually from ourselves. We're very selfish as researchers. And so we're kind of thinking, I'm the researcher, I need to build power with this individual or with this community. But the reality is that there are already deeply entrenched and dynamic power dynamics that we need to be incorporating and recognising as part of that relationship. So it's not just about the researcher and the child and young person. We need to be bringing in the role of the parent, maybe siblings or grandparents, which is a project we're doing right now, maybe other people within a young person's care. And as that young person gets older, the role of their friends and peers becomes more important, which impacts on their worldview. But generally speaking, when we start a co-production relationship within a family, the child is the most disempowered person in that relationship, as inherently the youngest person normally in the room. So when we look back at the ladder of participation, this is a slightly adapted ladder by heart compared to what Sally presented before. We are still working on that kind of level 1, maybe level 2 of how we can, of the child walking into that room, and that dynamic is there before we've even started. So we've needed to find a way of how can we empower a child to be a participatory member, but also in time initiate and tell us what they want and how they want the research to take place. So next slide, please. So what we have started to introduce within our programmes of work is something called the Colearning Space. And this originates from Indigenous research which has been developed between Western researchers and Indigenous communities of Native American and First Nations in Canada, who are inherently systemically and historically disempowered and the most disempowered people in a relationship. And this is being shown to be a very good equaliser of that power between different communities, and in fact could be adapted for different marginalised and disempowered communities beyond children and young people as well. And what a co-learning space does is it brings humility into the relationship, which can be a difficult concept. So it recognises that everyone entering a co-production partnership or a co-learning space has something unique to bring and something unique to learn. And that goes as much, if not more, for the researchers or the clinicians in the room as it does for the child, the parent, and anybody else in that relationship. And so we need to recognise the individual strengths really of a child and the parent within a family dynamic, and not just see a family as a singular unit, but look at the individuals and the different worldviews in that unit. And having a co-learning space is a very good way of moving that child from manipulated, which normally starts with the parent dragging the child into a project, to a much more participatory and eventually leading space. And what a co-learning space does is it respects the autonomy and the individuality of all the people in the room, and it is built on reciprocity. So if we can move to the next slide, please, Emily. So part of our sort of early learnings from a co-learning space is we start really by finding out why the families and the individuals in those families are there. What is it that they want out of this relationship? So quite often the parent wants for their child's health to improve. The child might want a superhero toy, and that's absolutely fine. So we need to start building the conversations about reciprocity within that kind of relationship, and that's one of our starting bases. Now, the other thing that we've learned is we need to throw away the sort of old thinking of we will meet 4 times a year and we may do some training, which is what you see in pretty much every funding application for research ever. We need to kind of rip that up. And so we've started to co-develop our co-production and collaboration protocols with children and their families to find out what it is that they want, when they want it, and how that develops. So that's a living document that we keep coming back to at every contact point to find out how we can refine and improve our sort of co-support between each other. One thing that we found to be very helpful, and this reflects back onto the jargon issue, is about creating a shared glossary or dictionary. So we might say as researchers the word qualitative, which means nothing to anybody. So then we translate what we mean by that as researchers with the parent, or what that means for the parent, and then what that means for the child. So we have this sort of glossary of terms that we build up where each of the individuals in the room have a definition, have an understanding and a shared understanding of the key terms that we are using within a given research project. Now, as a child gets older and becomes a young person and becomes a young adult, it's really important to talk about a safe space for the young people to be able to socialise. So beyond the scope of the core project, what we found has worked very well is WhatsApp groups, for example, that the parents and the researchers and the young people can work together in that co-learning space and share information, share ideas, and just sort of know each other there. I think that's a really important thing. But also having some areas of other safety that a young person could or a parent could talk to people confidentially as well. And I think just one of our take homes is really thinking creatively about how co-production can happen between all of these dynamics. So this picture on the right is something that we did during the first lockdown when all the schools were shut and everybody was desperate for something to do. We co-produced with young people and their parents, and quite young children. I think our youngest child was 5 who was involved in this, to co-produce a booklet about research. So trying to identify what research meant for everybody. We talked about the rights that young people wanted in research, and could have brought together this sort of arts-based activity booklet. So we've got one for young children and we've got one for adolescents and teenagers, and then another one for parents. And from that, we produced postcards of the young people's art, and that's sent out to everybody who's involved in our research, wider research projects as well. So that was just one little example. Another thing that we're starting to do is re-examine what we mean by lived experience when we're talking about co-production. So we are starting to develop a sort of a method of immersive rehearsal, so a sort of immersive co-production, and broadening what we mean by lived experience to mean lived experience of a research process, because when we're involving children, it can be quite an arbitrary concept about asking them to contribute to a research program that they've never had experience of themselves. So we are starting to work about how we can ask families to pretend to be participants and experience all the different aspects of a research activity with researchers, and then we all get together as equal space to identify what it is we need to improve about a research process before it's even started or even gone into ethics. So next slide, please. So it's really important, some of our learning is to really think about not just the labels of, in our world, mental health or dementia, but think about the very wide concept of why people are in the room and the kind of different identities and labels that people feel, particularly if it comes to feeling disempowered in that relationship. And I can see the chat comments, that goes for parents as much as everything else. And the worldviews can wax and wane throughout from very early childhood, and can be very dynamic throughout even one research project. Things can change quite considerably, and we need to recognise that. Something else that we've done is started to engage people across different platforms. So looking at surveys and groups and maybe even comments on social media, and trying to kind of reach out to where young people and children are, rather than getting them to come into a room, which can be very intimidating. So I'm going to leave it there because I've babbled, and I'll hand over to Bryony to talk about Aspire.
Great, thank you, Bonnie. I'm aware we're running quite short of time, so I'll try to be very brief, but I just wanted to offer an example, a kind of case study, if you like, of a specific research project that we're running at the moment that has very much had co-production sort of at its heart. The initial idea came from conversations with families, and we've kind of continued in that vein. So the project's called Aspire. And the aim of the project has been to co-produce a support package to help parents and carers of young people who've been through difficult or stressful experiences, to support their young person and build their resilience. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank Tina Walker, who's been our PPI co-applicant on the project and has been incredible. She's a parent with experience of this topic herself and really passionate about increasing the amount of support available for young people and their parents and carers. And alongside Tina, we've had a really great stakeholder team of people with lived experience of this topic, so both parents and carers and young people as part of that group. And if you could just go to the next slide, Emily. And if you could skip through, I think, just in the interest of time, yeah. So this is just to illustrate some of the different ways that people with lived experience of this topic have been involved as part of our stakeholder team. So they really have been involved throughout in lots of different ways. From contributing to analysis in various ways, creating summaries to be shared with interview participants to help us get richer data. They've been very much involved in designing the initial prototype for the intervention, so helping us come up with the resources that we'd be sharing with parents and carers and to design the support that would go alongside that. And then as we're moving into a small feasibility study of the intervention that's been created, they've been really involved in helping to train the facilitator of the intervention and advising on recruitment. And as we come to the end of that study, they'll be involved in interpreting the findings, helping us decide what the next step should be for the project. Next slide, Emily. So this is just a sense of the intervention that we've come up with based on that co-production. And I can honestly say that it's a much, much better intervention than it would have been if a research team had kind of sat on our own in a room and tried to come up with something. It's also been a much longer process than it might otherwise have been. So whereas we might have ended up with something that was quite one size fits all, we've come up with something as a result of the input of the stakeholder team that has lots of different elements. So these are some of the kind of printed graphic resources, but there are also audio resources, there are videos. People can access the support entirely in paper format via a pack that we send out, but also online. So the scope of the intervention has become much bigger than I think it otherwise would have been, because our stakeholder team have really helped us to think about all the different needs that people might have and different ways they might need to access this support. I think there was a comment about who was the stakeholder team. So they were parents and carers with experience of this topic, so experience of supporting children after adversities, and young people. So we had 7 young people involved in the team. As Bonnie mentioned, that has created some really interesting power dynamics, I think. So in our kind of early meetings, there were some discussions about whether the children and young people should be involved in the same group as the parents and carers. And the parents and carers, I think we're a little bit nervous about whether they'd be able to kind of be as open with children and young people in the room. But the young people were really passionate that they wanted to be involved in those discussions and not feel that they were kind of being sidelined. So we sort of came up with a bit of a compromise, and we've had some kind of meetings where everyone's together, some where we've had specific meetings for young people and for parents and carers. And just the final slide. So this was just to illustrate that it's, as Bonnie mentioned, I think it's quite easy to have a very neat sort of protocol for involvement at the beginning, but the reality I think is much messier, because that's real life. So as an example, our intervention development workshop, initially it was planned to be a sort of whole day, everyone in a room. In the end, what we ended up with as a result of kind of co-producing the co-production was we ended up with a whole series of events, much shorter events, with different timings to suit different people. So some during the day, some after school, some face-to-face, some online. So something that was, yeah, perhaps not quite as neat, but I think enabled us to involve a lot more people and to get something that was much more meaningful as a result. So I'll stop there because I realise we've gone out of time. But yeah, thank you, Sally.
Thank you so much, panel. That's been a really whistle-stop tour of a very diverse programme of work. Sorry, I've got aeroplanes now going over. We haven't got much time, but if people are willing to hang on just for a few more minutes. Jonathan, were there any particular questions that anyone wants to address to the panel before we move into closure?
So thank you, Sally, and thank you, colleagues. It feels like we've travelled the world today in this webinar, which has been amazing. So thank you all. There is quite a few comments, so perhaps I could just invite the panel in a moment just to have a look at those. A request to have a second webinar that is co-produced and led by participants themselves. So thank you, Jack, for suggesting that one. I think that's a great idea. Because it helps us to see co-production through the 360-degree lens. So that's something for us to really think about. A question, or more of a comment, but I think it's related to a question really sort of at the outset of the presentation, was around equality, diversity and inclusion. And Michelle Walker posed this really as a statement, but how we really approach co-production authentically through the lens of EDI, which is just so important and integral to everything that we do, and about sort of how we work with and integrate and collaborate and work really closely with diverse communities. So just sort of would welcome people's thoughts on that.
So remind me of the question. Sorry, I was reading the chat.
So it was about, sort of from an equality, diversity and inclusion perspective. At times people sort of struggle with co-production across communities, and how do we really reach or access diverse communities, which is just so important.
Thank you, Caitlin. I think, like I said, in the principles, it's about making sure that you have a clear understanding of where, why and how you want to engage with people, and then to think about where and how you find them and engage with different people. But it's important to have a clear purpose. in terms of that engagement, because there's no point in reaching out and engaging people if you really aren't going to listen to what they've got to say and have those challenges that often come with that shift in a power base that Bonnie was talking about as well. Caitlin, your thoughts?
Yeah, just two very brief thoughts on that. And well, one's a challenge really, but the first is sort of taking a place-based approach and meeting people where they are, you know, in the communities, working with community leaders, trying to engage with people in a way that's meaningful to them rather than inviting them into a different world. You know, meeting them in their worlds, I think, is really important. And the second, and I've completely forgotten what my second point was, so come back to me.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is really the authenticity that underpins co-design and co-production, and it's absolutely a lived value that is integral to what we're doing, but recognising there are challenges sometimes in reaching out to diverse communities.
Yeah, and like I said at the beginning, I don't think we're ever going to get it spot on. I think it's an absolute process of continuing to reflect and evaluate and continue to reach out and explore new avenues of engaging as broad stakeholder and being as inclusive as possible.
Okay, thank you. And I'm aware of the time, but one further question Karen Saunders has posed, and Karen's asked also if there's any literature that you can share around co-learning spaces. So Karen said, could you just please tell us a little bit more about, sorry, I know you've just posted something else, Karen, I'm just reading the last one. Could you please talk a little bit more about the immersive lived experience feedback?
I'm writing a long post at the moment.
Okay.
I'll put some links about the co-learning spaces as well. I've got those handy, so I'll put that in.
Yeah, no, it's very, very stimulating. Thanks.
Absolutely. And Karen, please don't apologise for your many questions, because we really welcome those. So I'm sure colleagues would be very happy for you to reach to them as well outside of the webinar for further questions and clarity. So thank you. I think that's it, Sally, given the time.
Okay, next slide, please, Emily.
Yes, so we'd like to build on this fantastic webinar today and hope you'll be able to come to the next one, which is about how we wrap capabilities around health and social care needs of citizens and service users rather than around professions. And we'll be sharing with you some experiences, some opportunities and many of the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And then finally, our final slide is that the third series from our, is this you, Jonathan? Thank you.
It is, Sally, it is me. So the currently the last webinar in the series is around system leadership, workforce capacity and capabilities, due to be presented on the 12th of July, although it sounds like we might have another webinar linked to today's theme planned, which would be fabulous. But one of the things I just wanted to say to people is if there's anything anyone would like to share or contribute to this webinar, then I'm really keen to hear from you. So please do get in touch.
Okay, so thank you everyone for bearing with us. As you can see, there's so much to talk about in this zone, and appreciate your contributions in the chat, and apologies that we ran over a little bit. If we could say goodbye to you now, and if I could ask the panel just to remain behind, that would be great. Thank you everyone for your time.